Hi, and welcome to the Holistic Health Guide podcast. I'm Kathryn Berg, your host and guide for this podcast. I'm a certified classical homeopath with over 20 years of experience. Many years ago, someone asked me who my favorite clients were, then asked what their issues were. They were all the same. It was helping women of all ages with hormonal issues. I suppose because I had some of my own, I really feel connected to these women who struggle with this type of issue. It is a reality that hormone problems are so much worse than when I was growing up, I think. Probably wasn't talked about as much as it is now, of course. It just seems like people suffer so much more. Today, in our next episode, we'll be talking about how homeopathy can help women through menopause and other hormonal issues. Before we do that, we will discuss why you would want to use homeopathy rather than something like hormone replacement therapy. We will also talk about why there are so many more hormonal issues than there used to be, and why girls are entering puberty at such a young age now, sometimes as young as 9 years old. And let's not forget the impact of using synthetic hormones on your own hormones and menopause. And finally, if you stick around until the end of this episode, I'll share some tips on how to avoid endocrine disruptors in the environment, especially those over which you have no control. So let's get started, shall we? Have you ever wondered how your favorite holistic health practices really work? Are you curious to learn more? Welcome to Holistic Health Guide. I'm Kathryn Berg, a classical homeopath with over 20 years of experience. Join us as we explore homeopathy, stem cell activation patches, the Enneagram, and much more. Let's dive in and uncover the secrets and tips behind your favorite holistic health modalities. A few decades ago, women were introduced to the magic of hormone replacement therapy to help with symptoms of menopause and to prevent osteoporosis. I always thought that was a little crazy given that women's hormones are designed to change as we age. If one looks at the natural design of human biology, you can see that our bodies are indeed built to have a natural decline in hormones like estrogen and progesterone as we age, particularly after menopause. From an evolutionary perspective, this shift may have served a purpose. By having fewer hormones, women transition out of their childbearing years, which could reduce the risk of complications associated with late pregnancies or maternal mortality, ensuring that mothers are around to care for their existing children. So, nature really does a good job of trying to protect everybody by things functioning the way they're supposed to. And even if everything goes well, an older mother risks passing away and not being there for her youngest child. The argument is that introducing hormones through HRT extends the hormonal environment of a younger woman into an older age, which might not align with how our bodies are designed to function long term. And this extended exposure could potentially disrupt the balance, leading to risks like increased breast tissue stimulation, which is linked to a higher chance of breast cancer. I think almost everyone who's listening to this has probably heard about the risks of increased breast cancer from HRT. Well, HRT can have its benefits, such as relieving menopausal symptoms and protecting against osteoporosis. The evolutionary lens suggests that a natural decrease in hormones might serve a protective role against certain conditions, including hormone sensitive cancers. So, the big question in simple language is how is it that HRT can cause breast cancer? Hormone replacement therapy can increase the risk of breast cancer because it introduces extra hormones such as estrogen and sometimes progesterone into the body. And these hormones can stimulate the growth of breast tissue, including potentially cancerous cells if they are already present. And if you do any research at all, on cancer cells and whether they're present in the body, you'll probably find that a lot of us have a lot of different types of cancer cells present in the body. The real question is whether they replicate themselves. The exact mechanism with HRT and breast cancer isn't fully understood, but it's believed that the prolonged exposure to higher levels of hormones creates an environment where abnormal cells might grow more easily. And this risk is generally higher with combined HRT, which is estrogen and progesterone, compared to estrogen only HRT. However, as with most drug interventions, the risk often depends on factors like duration of use and, of course, the individual's overall health. And we can even talk about from a homeopathic perspective that we have certain miasms. And miasms are basically categories of disease. One of our miasms is called a cancer miasm. So if a client would need a remedy from that particular miasm, HRT would definitely be discouraged. Not to mention that we can help people with those hormonal issues using safe and effective and natural homeopathic remedies. Then there is always the risk that when you quit, your hormonal symptoms you were trying to mask with the HRT will come back once you stop, and they could come back with a vengeance. Because anytime you suppress something, it is more likely to come back even stronger than ever. Even before the use of HRT, there were women who used hormonal birth control in the form of pills, IUDs, patches, etc. And don't get me wrong, birth control pill was a huge discovery and development and invention for women and allowing them to have more control over their bodies. And I'm all for that. It can help women with other hormone related issues as well. But let's be clear on how they work and the impact on hormones specifically and the body in general. They typically suppress ovulation and they provide synthetic versions of estrogen or progestin. As a result, a woman's natural production of hormones is altered. And once again, depending on how long they're used, it could affect the way body transitions into menopause. So, here are some of the possible effects on menopause. There's a delayed onset of natural menopause. And some studies suggest that long term hormonal birth control use might delay the natural decline of ovarian function, potentially leading to a slightly later onset of menopause. This delay is not harmful necessarily, but it might shift when the menopause begins. So, another effect is mask symptoms. Birth control can mask common perimenopausal symptoms such as irregular periods and hot flashes by keeping hormone levels steady. Women may not notice that they are approaching menopause until they stop using hormonal contraception. But again, with homeopathy, we can help manage those hormonal levels with safe, natural, well chosen homeopathic remedies because the body can heal itself, even in these kinds of situations. Another possible effect of HRT on menopause is post birth control adjustment. And after stopping birth control, some women report a difficult transition as their body adjusts to fluctuating hormone levels. So they're used to it being really steady, and then it starts to fluctuate, and that can cause just all kinds of discomfort. This might feel like intensified or prolonged perimenopause. And perimenopause, just to include a definition here, is the time that leads up to when you actually stop getting a menstrual cycle and you haven't had one for a year, and then that's menopause. So perimenopause is the time that leads up to that. Perimenopause can start in your late 30s and it can last through the 40s and the 50s. So it can be a lengthy time. Another possible effect of HRT on menopause is bone density concerns. Long-term use of certain progestin-only contraceptives such as Depo-Provera, which keeps your period from happening for like 4 months or longer, has been associated with decreased bone density, which could contribute to complications like osteoporosis in menopause. The other thing we need to talk about just related to Depo-Provera and some of these other contraceptives or hormonal things that suppress your menstrual cycle or suppress ovulation. This is a way that your body detoxes is through a menstrual cycle. So you're not going to detox the way that your body is designed to detox by suppressing your menstrual cycle. There is conflicting evidence on the severity of menopause symptoms post HRT. Some research suggests women who use birth control long term may experience milder menopause symptoms as the steady hormone exposure could mitigate the fluctuations seen during perimenopause. Other anecdotal reports indicate some women feel they have a harder time adjusting after years of hormonal suppression. In my non scientific survey of my clients over the years, the ones who are on hormonal birth control for an extended period of time had a much more difficult time with perimenopause than those who only used it a short time or never used it at all. But then these were the people who came to see me because they were having those problems. So that's why I say it's non scientific, because they wanted to use homeopathy to help them get through their symptoms of perimenopause. And so the people who didn't need homeopathy, of course, wouldn't have come to see me. There are other factors that play a role as the age when you stop birth control. Women who stop hormonal contraception closer to menopause might feel the effects of a hormone drop more acutely. And this makes sense, of course. And it is important to note that while birth control and HRT aren't exactly the same thing, there is still some messing around with the hormones that occurs in each case. Earlier, I commented on how messed up people's hormones seem to be nowadays, and it seems to could be partially environmental. Many years ago, like when I was growing up, to me, the lead was what everyone was concerned about, and it still is concerning. A lot of lead has been cleaned up. Not so with some plastics, particularly those used in water bottles and food containers and other consumer products. And these could be personal care products. So it could be your shampoo, your conditioner, your liquid soap, your makeup. These plastics can release chemicals that mimic estrogen. These chemicals are called endocrine disruptors because they interfere the normal function of hormones in the body, and not just female hormones, male hormones as well, and other types. But we're going to stick with female hormones for today's lesson and the next cast episode as well. What happens with these chemicals in the environment is that they mimic estrogen. These chemicals include bisphenol A, which is also called BPA. And a lot of times you'll see labels on products and they'll say no BPA. Found in polycarbonate plastics and in epoxy resins. They're often used in water bottles and food can lining. You're a person who buys a lot of water, plastic containers, is a potential problem for you. They are so can be found, not much anymore, but they used to be found on thermal receipts from store purchases because they thermal printing process rather than an ink printing process. BPA has been in commercial use since 1957, so it's been around for a long time. Many products that are now sold in plastic containers were sold in glass for many years after 1957. I can remember using shampoo from a glass bottle when I was a girl. A little scary if it broke in the bathtub, right? Because you'd have to get out and you wouldn't get your hair washed. EPA mimics estrogen by binding to estrogen receptors in the body, potentially disrupting normal hormone activity. A lot of times people don't think about what toxicity means. That is how the toxicity of BPA acts by not allowing actual estrogen to bind to the receptors. Even small amounts can influence processes like reproduction, metabolism, and brain development. especially in developing fetuses, infants, and young children. Even receipts have a history of being a source of BPA, as I said, as the thermal paper requires it to print. Now, most models and printers use BPS and BPF. More on that in a bit. Just be sure you wash your hands when you handle receipts. Other key chemical that can mimic estrogen are phthalates. Now, this is spelled PHTHALATES, but it's pronounced phthalates. Used to make plastics flexible, and they're found in products like plastic food wrap, containers, and personal care products. A lot of times now, when you buy personal care products, it'll say no phthalate. They can interfere with hormone signaling and are linked to developmental and reproductive issues. So, as I mentioned earlier, lead used to be the developmental issue toxin, and it still is. I mean, it's still a problem, and it's still toxic, but now there's just more things that we need to worry about. BPS and BPF, as I mentioned them earlier, they are the replacements for BPA and some BPA free products. But as you might have guessed, research shows they have similar estrogen mimicking effects. So, how these chemicals affect the body is they can mimic natural estrogen, potentially causing hormonal imbalances, early puberty in children. I mentioned that earlier, didn't I? Increased risk of breast and prostate cancers. So, not just for women, this is an issue, and fertility problems, metabolic orders like obesity and diabetes. So, how do these chemicals get into the body? A lot of different ways this can happen, and one of them is by leaching. Plastics can release these chemicals into food or beverages, especially when heated. For example, microwaving plastic containers, leaving water bottles in the sun. So, always better to get a water bottle, perhaps that's stainless steel instead of plastic. And raise your hand if you do that. Do you microwave things in plastic containers? Do you leave a water bottle out in the sun? Maybe you're gardening, maybe you're watching your kids at sports or your grandkids. Oh, another way that these chemicals get into our body is by degradation. Over time, plastics break down and release chemicals. And one has to wonder whether the ingredients in the personal care products we use are tested to assure they don't cause more leaching from the plastics. And what about the big island of plastic that floats around in the ocean? Are these affecting us even if we're landlocked? Or certainly if we live on a coast? Here's to reduce exposure to these chemicals that can cause hormonal imbalances. First of all, use glass, stainless steel, or BPA free containers for food and beverages. Avoid microwaving or freezing food in plastic containers. Check recycling codes on plastics. Avoid plastics marked with a number 3, which is a PVC, a number 6, which is a polystyrene, and a number 7, which is another polycarbonate, as they're more likely to contain harmful chemicals. Avoid single use plastics whenever possible. And did you know you're not supposed to reuse those plastic bottles? So they are technically single use plastics. Use fresh or frozen food instead of canned food, as linings often contain BPA. Often these cans are marked that they don't contain any BPA, but are they free from the other BP, whatever, chemicals? Be mindful of these sources, and making safer choices can help reduce exposure to hormone disrupting chemicals in everyday life. So, how long before the chemicals clear your body? When would you notice a difference? Well, there is a question about this. Is that the BPA is processed and excreted relatively quickly, supposedly, usually within 24 to 48 hours after exposure. But if you're the kind of person who continues to use these plastic containers, you'll have ongoing exposure. Though BPA clears quickly, a constant low level exposure from receipts and canned foods and plastics, etc., can keep it circulating in the body. Where are the chemicals stored in your body? One of the places is that it is stored in fat. Well, BPA itself doesn't stay in the body long. Some research suggests that endocrine disrupting chemicals might have longer term effects, particularly if they have influenced fat storage, liver function, or hormone regulation. So there's yet another reason to deal with that unhealthy liver mentioned in podcast episodes 2 and 3. And then there's another option with homeopathy to use homeopathic BPA to help clear the BPA out of the fat and liver to help with hormone regulation. This is something I do often for clients if they know the substance that caused the problem they are experiencing, and it's called homeopathic detox. Well known homeopath refers to it as fighting fire with fire. It's also called isopathy, which means using the same substance that's potentized rather than similar, which is what homeopathy means. Homeopathy means similar suffering, isopathy means same suffering. So, what we do is we use potentized substances that produce the symptoms similar to what you're experiencing in homeopathy. And it would be the same symptoms you're experiencing when we use isopathy. And sometimes the constitutional homeopathy itself can do it, but sometimes it cannot. We have to rely on the therapeutic approach. So, has BPA been banned? You've probably heard that it has. As of January in 2025, bisphenol A or BPA has not been banned at the federal level, United States. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, continues to allow the use of BPA in various food contact materials, maintaining that current approved uses are safe. I'm not so sure I agree with that. However, several individual states have enacted their own restrictions on BPA. In 2009, Minnesota, my state, yay, became the first state to ban BPA in baby bottles and sippy cups. Can you imagine all those hormones that our little babies were getting? I remember when this bill was being lobbied in the state legislature, and I was a volunteer lobbyist at the state legislature lobbying for natural health laws. And I would stay and listen to hearings on this bill in 2009. And you can figure out yourself which party supported the ban on BPA and which. Shortly after Minnesota banned BPA, Connecticut prohibited BPA in reusable food and beverage containers as well as in infant formula and baby food containers. And Washington State implemented a ban on BPA in bottles, cups, and other food and drink containers intended for children under 3 years of age, effective July 2011. And so, even if your state isn't one of these states, a lot of times when one state bans them, they don't have two different production lines for making these. They just change their formula. In total, more than 30 states and local governments have introduced policies restricting the production, use, and distribution of BPA, particularly in products intended for young children. And remember when we mentioned earlier that there's a lot of 9-year-old girls who are getting their menstrual cycle. And you might think, well, why is this really an issue? Well, you know what? Girls stop growing when they're not get their cycle. So they could end up being very small women. And while these state level actions reflect growing concern over the BPA's potential health effects, a comprehensive federal ban, as I said, hasn't been enacted. The FDA claims to continue to monitor scientific research on BPA and has stated that it will consider new data to ensure the safe use of BPA in food packaging, whatever that means. It just sounds like, you know, political speak. So personally, I'm doubtful of this, that they spend much time looking at it. Look how long it took to ban red dye number 3. There's still lots of other food dyes that haven't been banned. So I don't think BPA and its similar products are high on their list of things that they're paying attention to. The data that I presented in these last few slides comes from the FDA, various state departments of health, and a site called Leaf Score. Well, that's all for now on this topic. Our next episode will be Natural Help for Menopausal Symptoms, Part 2, and we'll dig into more homeopathy next time. Remember, if you have a friend or family who is struggling with menopausal symptoms, please share this episode with them and the next one when it comes out. Natural health advice generally gets shared by word of mouth, so be sure to help your friends by sharing this episode. And then please follow, rate, and/or review this podcast as it helps other people find it. If you want a bit of a preview of the next episode, there will be a link in the show notes to a blog post I wrote a few years ago. It's still relevant as the truth of healing is always relevant. And now, finally, for that last bit of information on how to avoid getting exposed to BPA. Did you know that touching cash register receipts when you have lotion on your hands can increase the absorption of BPA by a factor of 10? And the same is true with hand sanitizers. Don't even get me started on those. If you must handle receipts, wash and dry your hands when you are done handling them. Make sure you are done handling them before you put lotion on after washing and drying your hands. Also, another thing to watch for is that many memory foam mattresses, mattress toppers, and waterproof mattress protectors contain BPA and other endocrine disruptors. So look for OEKO-TEX or GOTS certified bedding to reduce exposure. If replacing your mattress isn't an option, you can use a 100% cotton barrier sheet between you and the synthetic materials. And you can again find some of these sheets that are certified by these same organizations. And this isn't a waterproof barrier, it's a 100% cotton sheet that is tested for toxins and certified safe. If you use a fitted sheet with those qualifications, you'll be able to avoid BPA and other endocrine disruptors in your mattress. Be sure to join us for part 2 of Natural Health for Menopausal Symptoms, which will be our next episode. I'm Kathryn Berg, certified classical homeopath, and this has been the Holistic Health Guide podcast. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, be healthy and happy.